Welcome, everybody, to Cure Addiction Now. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm so happy to be with this very esteemed panel of the most brilliant research scientists that exist in the world for addiction research. My story, I'll tell you, it's a story so many other people have experienced. I had a son named Jason Davis. Loved him more than life itself. He'd had an addiction problem. He was addicted to opiates. And it was a 12-year journey. He was sober, then he wasn't. He was in rehab, he got sober, and he kept relapsing. He went through what a lot of people who are addicts go through. He came to me one day and he said, "Mom, we have to start a charity." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine starting another charity because I have another charity." And he said, "I have had the hardest time. I've struggled so much in my life staying sober. What exists today isn't working for me. And it's not working for so many people. We have so much more that we can do, and we have to do it." I know so many people that don't have the luxury of ever being sent to a rehab facility and knowing what it's even going to be like for a day to feel sober and to see what that's like. We have to find ways of making it fair for everybody who can or cannot afford to go to rehab to be able to get sober. And we talked a long, long time, and we seeked out to get doctors who are going to be the best of the best doctors. And that wasn't so easy because for 20 years, nobody did any real significant research in developing new medications and really studying your brain. This is a brain disease. It comes from your brain, and it's how you see things. Some people in their lives can try a drug once, an alcoholic beverage once, and they are hooked for life. They just are. There's so many stories. Other people can recreationally try something here and there and never become addicted, and it doesn't destroy their lives. We need to understand why that is. We need to find ways of preventing that. We need to help everybody in the most equitable way possible to find a method that's going to work for them. What we have today is not adequate. This is the leading cause of death in our country now for people 50 years old and younger. I lost my son, Jason. He had been sober for 9 months. I got that one call from my husband, Kenny. I was away on a trip with my daughter, Isabella, and I got the most heartbreaking call of my life. I didn't know how I was going to ever function in my life. I didn't know how I was going to put one foot in front of the other. I didn't know how I was going to breathe. It was so devastating. It was so devastating for my children. It was so devastating for Kenny. You don't know what to do. When you have a loved one who is an addict, you have the disease as well as they have the disease. It's not just a one thing. It is a family disease, and everybody who loves that person suffers with them. You wait for that call in the middle of the night. You don't know what's going to happen, but one call can change it all. I got that call from Kenny. I was walking through a storm in Aspen, and my life has never been the same. It was the worst thing that could have happened to me. How do you pick up the pieces? How do you go on? How do we make sense of this disease? Addiction is a disease that doesn't get enough credibility. A lot of people don't call it a disease. I think that's one of the biggest problems. We don't choose diseases, they choose us. One day I woke up and I had multiple sclerosis. I knew nothing about multiple sclerosis, but all of a sudden it was a label that was going to label me for the rest of my life. And I had to learn really quick, what can I do for this disease? And I found some wonderful things. And I'm really grateful today. We have 25 medications on the market that help stop the progression of MS. For addiction, it's a disease too. Jason woke up one day when he was about 21 years old after having never used a drug in his life. And he tried one for the first time at his brother's wedding, and he had a back problem. Somebody said, "Come smoke opium, your back pain will go away." And it did, but he became an addict very quickly. It made a lot of things in his life change really fast, but he had that predisposition to becoming an addict. It's not that he was a bad person. He has a bad disease. We can't label people. We can't have shame. We can't put shame on people that have a disease. We have to fight. We have to find logical explanations for what this disease really is. And we have to find methods that are going to help a lot of people. I am working my hardest every single day. I wake up and I'm thinking, what are we going to do? How can we make this better? And I'm so grateful. We put this team of doctors here. It was not an easy team of doctors to put together. And I think they're brilliant. This is an area where nobody spent money at all in research, which is crazy because it is the leading cause of death in our country. How could we ignore this? Daily, we don't give it any significance. I don't see people talking much about this disease and saying that it is the leading cause of death in our country. Right now, since Jason passed away exactly 3 years ago, the fentanyl crisis has become just the biggest thing you hear about every day. It doesn't take away from the other people who are always an addict and finding things for them as well. But every single day, this huge amount of fentanyl that seems to be being shipped from China to Mexico, the Mexican drug lords are pressing this into every single drug that you could take. So if you buy any drug on the street and not at Rite Aid or CVS, you can be 98% sure that you are going to take something that is going to kill you. Unless you have gotten yourself addicted to fentanyl, which doesn't happen as often. But most people that are taking it today, kids, sometimes they go to a party, they try a pill. Now they're trying a fourth of a pill, and all 4 kids taking the pill they're dying, they're overdosing. It is so strong, it is so bad. This idea of opening our borders has opened our borders to letting every single medicine come into our country. You might buy a pill that looks like my antidepressant. This looks like OxyContin. This looks like cocaine. This looks like heroin. There's a really good chance. There's a 98% chance if you take that, you will die. It is the equivalent of you having 50 to 100 shots of heroin. Most people's bodies cannot withstand that and live through it. So we are really trying our hardest. Today, also, when everybody leaves, I'm a big advocate of Narcan. Everybody's going to get Narcan when they leave today, which seems to be have a harder thing to get in Los Angeles than it is in other cities. But it's something that every last person cannot afford not to have this on them at all times. If your kids are going to a party, it needs to be in their backpack. When you're driving, it should be in your glove compartment. It should be everywhere. If you overdose from fentanyl, most people are not buying fentanyl, they're buying something else. But if you overdose accidentally from fentanyl and you spray this up somebody's nose, they will probably live. I think there's a 94% chance that they will live. So this is important. We're trying to advocate that every Uber driver, every rideshare driver has this. People go out and take an Uber at night because they don't want to get in a drunk driving situation, which is great, but they might be using drugs. And so it's important that every Uber driver and everybody knows how to use Narcan, and there's no reason not to have it. If you overdosed from an opiate overdose, you have 4 minutes to your brain damage. You have 6 minutes to you are dead. It's going to take 911 about 10 minutes or more to respond to you. This is the only thing that will help you. So you need to have this. So we're going to give these away today. And my daughter and Jason are going to do a little demonstration of exactly how to give Narcan towards the end of this today. So that's that. So I'm a really lucky mom. I have amazing daughters, amazing sons, and I'm sitting here with my daughter, Isabella. Since this all started, she was obviously quite devastated about what happened with her brother. And she and her sister, Mariella, have been working really hard on another part of this charity called You Can Save a Friend. And she's going to talk about that for a minute.
Hello. I started You Can Save a Friend a little after Cure Addiction Now was started. It's kind of a branch off of the charity targeted towards teens and young adults who are either dealing with addiction or are, like many teens today, are seeing the effects of fentanyl. Going off of what my mom was saying, anything that is not purchased from a pharmacy will most likely be laced with fentanyl, whether it's Adderall, Xanax, even weed now. And most of the time, the kids don't know that they are using it, or whoever is taking it don't know that there is fentanyl in it, and it is extremely lethal. And the reason why You Can Save a Friend is pushing Narcan into all schools. LAUSD just did a mandate where they required all schools to have it. And we are also trying for Ubers, for all kids to have it. I do most likely carry it in my bag whenever I am going out, just in case, because there have been many instances at parties where people don't know they're taking it. And the reason we do need it is because, like you said, there is a short time frame between where Narcan will be effective. And it is extremely important to have it with you. We also work with trying to get the Good Samaritan laws in all states. This makes it so that if you are using drugs with a person or you gave someone the drugs and they are overdosing, that you won't be legally prosecuted, and that all people care about is saving that person's life. You Can Save a Friend also deals not just with addiction, but with mental health. And the reason for You Can Save a Friend is so that you're never scared to call 911 when someone is having an emergency, whether you think they're going to hurt themselves or they are using drugs.
I love you so much. She is my rock star. I love this child more than life.
We do have PSAs out. Me and Jason are going to show you how to use Narcan a little later, just so everybody, it's pretty easy, but we do have PSAs out, which explains it a little more. And we have more of a visual representation of how to use it and just about what You Can Save a Friend is. And we are looking for more people to join. If anyone has younger kids in schools, we are trying to get the word out into not just in LA, but in all states. And we always need help with that. So, yeah.
What can I say?
Is there anything else?
I love you. I love you more than anything on the planet, and I'm so proud of you. Anyway, she's helping lots of people, and so is Mariella, who's hiding in the back. She's like, what, me? But she's terrific, and I'm really proud of what they're doing. And we're doing everything we can, and there's so many layers to this problem of addiction. It just goes on and on and on. So we're doing the best we can. So I'm now going to introduce the most amazing Dr. Kurt Rasmussen.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for joining. You'll join us online, and thanks for joining us here today. We've got a fantastic educational program for you today. We've got some of the leading researchers in substance use disorder from around the world to present to you today. We have some great guest speakers who will speak as well, and we're going to cover the most important topics in the area. And at the end, we have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So I suggest you take advantage of that. We've got an assembled group of experts here, and please send your questions in. We look forward to answering them.
Get some things. If you have a question, you can send them up here if you have any questions. And well, we'd love to hear your questions.
And let me just like to introduce the panel first. First, I'm Kurt Rasmussen. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Delix Therapeutics. Today we have with us Dr. Kelly Dunn and Dr. Justin Strickland from Johns Hopkins University. We've got Jason Waller, who's a member of the CAN board. Dr. Judy R. Ashworth from Pinney Associates and Harm Reduction Therapeutics. Dr. Chris Evans from UCLA. Dr. Deborah Mash from the University of Miami School of Medicine.
But she's there.
She's on Zoom.
I think she got sick, but she's on Zoom. She's Zooming.
Dr. Catherine Cunningham from the University of Texas Medical Branch. Dr. John Crystal from Yale University, online. Dr. Courtney Miller from Scripps, also online. Dr. Garrett Stuber from the University of Washington, also online. And Dr. Stephanie Caligiuri from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And Dr. Adam Kaplan from MyMed Pharmaceuticals. So I think we'll start off today with a guest speaker, Madison Mastera on the end there, and she's going to tell us about living with substance use disorder and her personal experience.
Yes, hi. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Madison Mastera. I am 28 years old and I was born and raised here in Southern California in Newport Beach, California. I am currently 2 years sober. In high school, thank you. Thank you. In high school, I started off as a star athlete and honor roll student. I was going out on the weekends with my friends where recreational and experimental drug use was just beginning in all of our 16-year-old lives. However, the opiate epidemic was at its height, and I soon became an everyday user of heroin. I dropped out of school. My family was sending me to rehabs, and my life became miserable. It was a dark and lonely, self-destructive path that I was on for the next 10 years. Recently, in the last 4 years, fentanyl has flooded the US. It felt as if every week I was getting the devastating news that a friend had passed away to fentanyl overdose. It was in everything, not just opiates, cocaine, Molly, pills. My childhood best friend, Michelle Avila, who was not an addict, and her boyfriend happened to take Xanax at a weekend party. They didn't wake up the next day. That Xanax was laced with fentanyl, and they died together in their sleep. Later, there was news of another young kid from our high school going to federal prison for 20 years due to him manufacturing fentanyl-laced Xanax and oxycodone pills by the 10,000s in our community. I was shocked, and reality set in that these young people who are dealing or making the drugs are killing off people in their own community from their childhood. Parents are losing their children, mothers are watching their sons get taken to prison, and thousands of families are grieving due to fentanyl. I had my own experience with fentanyl overdose. I was Narcaned several times by paramedics and taken to the hospital. The doctor said it was a miracle that I was alive because when they arrived to the scene, I was blue and completely unresponsive to the first 2 doses of Narcan. The disease of addiction had grown so strong in me over the years that even in the face of death, I didn't stop using. Overnight, fentanyl had taken over, and it became the only drug that any opiate user could buy. It was cheaper and stronger. It became what every opiate addict wanted. When an opiate addict hears that a dealer has a batch that people are dying from, it actually draws them more business. It's extremely dangerous and a dark, sinister life that these lost souls live in. I was one of them. In the next 2 months, I continuously overdosed about 6 times, and I came to realize that I would die if I didn't get sober. In March of 2021, I checked myself into a high-structured sober living called Graceland Ranch in Agora Hills, California. I found this program through social media. The owner was spreading the awareness of hope and solution to the disease of addiction with a supportive community. Through my phone, I found help, and it changed my life. I completed the year program and started working at the program. I had an epiphany that I survived the disease of addiction to serve a purpose in this world, to spread the awareness and severity of fentanyl use, as well as the disease of addiction as a whole. Today, I help newly recovering addicts every day and talk to several hundreds of struggling addicts, reaching out to our program through social media. I'm here to be a living example that there is hope and a way out. I want to thank you all for listening to my story. Thank you, Nancy, for allowing me to speak to all you wonderful people here. And thank you to Danielle and Patrick Ridge, the owners of Graceland, who gave me a new life. It takes a team willing to help and spread awareness to make a difference. And I am grateful to be here today to witness all the people in this room willing to make a change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so meaningful.
Of course.
Thank you, Madison. Our next topic is going to be the current state of substance use disorder and opioid use disorder treatment and the gaps that we see here today. The first speaker will be Dr. Justin Strickland from Johns Hopkins University. Oh, thank you. Our first speaker will be Dr. Justin Strickland from Johns Hopkins University.
Thanks, Dr. Rasmussen, and thank you, Nancy, Madison, Adam, and Brennan for sharing your lived experience today. we can talk about the science a lot, but hearing those stories is so important to contextualize all of this. Dr. Dunn and I are going to talk a little bit about the state of the science in terms of the gaps that we have in treatment and how later on, as we'll hear from researchers from the Cure Addiction Now Foundation, the ways that we can address those gaps. The United States is facing several concurrent crises of substance use, and these crises conflude into challenging what we think of in the status quo of treatment, prevention, and what we know as researchers and clinicians in terms of treating substance use disorder. As we've already heard in most of the country, what was once just heroin is now almost completely, if not completely, fentanyl. Fentanyl, for those of you who don't know, is an opioid just like heroin, but acts very differently in the body, and it presents a very different clinical phenomenology that for us as researchers and us as clinicians doesn't look like what we know. The shift in the drug supply has subsequently led to rates of overdose, particularly opioid and fentanyl overdose, that far surpass what we've ever seen. Just this past year, over 100,000 overdoses were recorded in the US. At the same time, we're facing a changing drug market and drug supply and a changing drug epidemiology as well. We're facing an increase in the use and overdose related to stimulants, particularly methamphetamine. So while the use of methamphetamine back in 2015 amongst folks that use opioids was down all the way down at 9%, that rate has climbed all the way up to 50% in recent years, 1 in 2 people. These shifts in the drug use market, drug use trends have created what epidemiologists refer to as the 4th wave of the opioid overdose epidemic. We're already on that 4th wave. That is characterized by not only this persistent problem of fentanyl, things we've heard about today, but this emerging problem of polysubstance use related to primarily opioids and stimulants. I'd like to say these are new problems, but they're not new problems. We have a cyclic pattern of drugs increasing and decreasing in the US, the emergence of new drugs, the emergence of old drugs that are brought anew. But what makes these particularly troublesome and these new compounds emerging, this new epidemiology emerging, is the sheer potency of fentanyl, the difficulty in recognizing it. We've already heard stories of that today, and how hard it is to identify these drugs in the market as they rapidly change. So just as one example, I know that Dr. Evans will talk about this more later today, but we're seeing adulteration with even more potent opioid analogs that look like fentanyl, but are even more potent, and other novel compounds. The veterinary medicine xylazine is appearing in the drug supply, otherwise known as trank dope, something that none of us would have expected just years ago. And these drugs present a very different way in how we treat substance use, and they're rendering even some of our most effective medications, the opioid overdose antidote or medication, Narcan, does minimal or does very little to a xylazine overdose. So it presents this challenge for all of us to think about how can we think of creative new solutions. Together, these challenges are all calling for a new approach in how we address substance use, how we think about substance use. Many of the things you'll hear about in the panel throughout the rest of the day, and how we're going to improve the lives of those seeking help. I'll pass it off now to my colleague, Dr. Dunn, who will speak on some of those topics.
Thank you, Dr. Strickland. So we are fortunate in that we have a robust treatment infrastructure for substance use disorder and for opioid use disorder in particular. And many of those treatments are premised on taking medications on a daily basis. Those treatments work very well for some people. However, there are major and important gaps in care that still remain. For instance, there was a recent study that estimated that of the more than 7 million individuals in the United States who would qualify for opioid use disorder treatment, 86% of them were not receiving it. So we know that these treatments work very well for some people, but they do not work very well for all people. And we don't know currently how to predict when someone might respond positively to these treatments. And it may be that they don't respond to the treatment, that it's not what they need at the time. And it may be that they want access to these treatments, but there's no availability. So for instance, areas that are rural or tribal in nature, there are patients who have no access to various forms of treatment and may drive hours a day to be able to take part in these various treatments. So in addition, as my colleague, Dr. Strickland just noted, there's at the moment this fourth wave of the opioid crisis, which is characterized by both opioid use and methamphetamine use. And our treatment system is really designed around the treatment of one substance. So when we design medications, they often are designed to treat one substance, but when we treat patients, they often are using many substances. And so they're not really optimized for that kind of clinical condition. So one challenge that our scientific community often faces is that science moves more slowly than drug use trends. And that's evident by the onset of xylazine in our drug product and the onset of fentanyl in our heroin product. And this is because in part, science generally builds slowly. It builds off of prior science. And there's a lot of value in having that process. It's an important feature of the scientific process in general, but it can make our progress somewhat slow. And but every once in a while, we have big ideas that we think if we could just kind of skip ahead to these big ideas and just see if they would work. There's reason to believe that they would, if we can move past the scientific process and just jump forward and see if we can find a signal, then maybe that would be a more transformative approach. And those ideas are things like medications that don't need to be taken on a daily basis, but can be taken maybe once or twice and produce a transformative effect. Or perhaps it would be expanding access to naloxone beyond just small iterative changes, or more active surveillance of the drugs that are being adulterated into our products, or perhaps understanding more about how to customize treatments to patients to better fit the treatment to the patient so that they are more successful the first time they interact with it, or even just identifying ways of treating opioid use or substance use that is polydrug in nature, or perhaps occurring in the context of other mental health conditions, which is what we know our clinical patients need. So those are big ideas that if we could jump ahead to those and just see if they would work, maybe we could transform our treatment system. And so it's often difficult for us as scientists to find financial support to do things like that, because we need evidence, and from science, we need evidence to be able to make those changes. But that's why initiatives like Cure Addiction Now, I think, are really valuable. Why I'm happy to be a part of it is because I think that it provides an opportunity for us to make these big jumps and to have these big transformative opportunities to see if we take a risk and see if these effects, or if these ideas that we have are effective, and we gain a little bit of evidence, that gives us what we need to go to these other larger community funders and say, we have evidence that this would work and we think it could kind of transform things. So we need the ability to kind of jump forward like that. And so the scientists, and in general, I think, having worked in this area for a long time, and particularly very close with people who are exposed to fentanyl, I think we do need big ideas. I think the current ideas that we have are not, I don't think that we're going to solve the fentanyl crisis with those ideas. I think we need big changes. And I think the scientists that you're going to see and the talks that you're going to see today kind of represent those big transformative opportunities that we might be able to, that by showing effects in these areas, we might be able to create new pathways and new treatment domains in general to help meet the needs of opioid use disorder and persons with substance use disorder.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Kelly and Justin. I'd like to now introduce Jason Waller. His topic he's going to address is Advocates for CAN.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all of you for being here. It is great to see all of you. Nancy, thank you for putting this together, and appreciate seeing all of you guys here. As we all know, addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. It is primary, it's chronic, it's progressive, and it's fatal if it's untreated. And so part of my role is somebody that has lived with addiction and now lives in recovery to show people that there is a better way and there is a new light. But more importantly is it's time that we make a shift and we make a change in the way we approach this. And, I always talk about, because not only addiction, and substances are a part of the problem, but it's a lot of the mental health components that go into it as well. And if you look at how we've treated mental health over the last 60 years, it's outdated. You cluster a bunch of symptoms and you throw medication at it and hoping that it will shift, when we know that the organ that's directly affected also behind this is the brain. And so I think with research and with these amazing doctors and looking at other avenues, we can really make light to this and really no, it's not. We know it's not our kidney, it's not our liver. We know that the organ that's directly impacted is it's our brain, and we have a thinking problem. And just being in the depths of addiction, I can see that I struggled with addiction way before I ever picked up a drink or a drug. 13, 14 years old, struggling with OCD, obsessive compulsive hand washing, having to wear neoprene gloves at night, and looking for anything to do to escape that feeling. And when I found substances, that took away that pain, took away that anguish and that guilt I had with myself. And it's a very it's a very isolating disease, if you will. And so I think it's amazing to be able to be a part of this, to share my truths and experiences, share, on what I've gone through, but also to have the backing of the research by these incredible people to shed light on there is a new way to look at this. And it's time that we do that. And so I'm just, I'm kind of like the cheerleader for CAN, just getting on my soapbox and just talking about how amazing it is, and to get more people involved, and to shed light and to know that you're not alone. This is impacting our country more than ever. This is one of the only diseases in American history that's been on a steady incline with the amount of deaths over the last 20 years straight. And so I just think it's important that we talk. My biggest thing is I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. But I'm somebody that's lived through this. And I know that there's a lot more that can be done. And there's a lot more that needs to be done. And so again, just by you guys being here together, collectively, we can make a difference and make a change. There is no shame within this. Addiction doesn't dictate who we are, but it doesn't justify our actions. So it's time that we make a shift, we make a move, and we shed light on this, and we make a change. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Great. Okay, I'd like to move on to our next topic now. We mentioned Narcan earlier in the presentation, and now we're going to have a couple talks on overdose protection. Dr. Judy Ashworth works with Penny Associates and Harm Reduction Therapeutics, and she's going to talk to us about OTC naloxone. Judy?
Thank you. And thanks to Nancy and the CAN organization for inviting me to speak today. So I'm the chief medical officer at a nonprofit company called Harm Reduction Therapeutics, and I'm going to take you through in the next 5 minutes our 5-year history of trying to get naloxone, so that the drug inside Narcan, over the counter, so anyone could walk in, grab it, and not have any issues with stigma or whether or not they have it in the pharmacy or not, and whether or not you even have a prescription. Most of you probably know that naloxone's been around since 1971, approved for the treatment of opioid overdose, where we know it saves lives for over 50 years now. In the 1990s and 2000s, there's an increasing distribution of naloxone to harm reduction communities and groups, and for use for laypersons to be able to give the drug to someone who's overdosing. And they would often use a little atomizer to put on the injectable to turn it into a nasal spray. So we're trying to make it easier for people to use. So already back in 2012, the FDA, CDC, and NIDA, which National Institute of Drug Abuse, had a workshop to discuss how can we get more formulations out there for lay people to use, and how can we get it over the counter. So those were issues were being discussed over 10 years ago. In that workshop, the FDA laid kind of the foundation for how to get a product approved as a prescription. And that was a pathway that then Narcan used, as well as the auto injector in vivo, what's it called? Vivo. Anyway, so the FDA gave them that pathway, showed them that, you need to be able to show that your drug delivers the drug as fast as that injectable, given intramuscularly. And also then if you want to take that next step and get it over the counter, then you'd have to develop a drug fact label that is what's on the back of every over-the-counter drug that explains to the consumer how to use the product appropriately, and test it with consumers in a little study, and then you can apply to switch your compound to the over-the-counter market. So in the case of naloxone, then this specifically again means you need to test your drug against the injectable, the 0.4 milligram naloxone, and show that your drug delivers the drug as fast as that product does. And this also then can be used with appropriately in just device testing. The manufacturers of these two products, Narcan Zevo, they were approved back in 2014 and 2015 as prescription drugs. So all they needed to do after that was to do that drug pack label development for the carton and then test it with consumers so they could move it to the over-the-counter market to increase the access. According to the FDA, these companies were reluctant to move it over the counter and said that it was a challenge for them, a hurdle to be able to develop that drug label. They didn't have that expertise as a prescription drug company. And so in 2016, the FDA themselves, and they've never done this before, the FDA themselves developed the fact label, the drug labeling for the back of an over-the-counter product. One for the auto injector, as well as one for the Narcan nasal spray type spray, to try and encourage then companies to then just take that next step, take that label that we've already developed and tested, just tweak it for your own product and test it in consumers, and then get it over the counter. So many years have passed since that time, as you know. In 2016, FDA had already published those two different drug pack labels that could be used. So in 2017, when still no movement was happening there, Harm Reduction Therapeutics was created as a nonprofit to get a naloxone product to the OTC market. The hurdle that we had is that we didn't have a product to switch. So we had to start from zero, develop a naloxone product, and we developed it as a nasal spray. We had to do the clinical testing to show that it delivers the drug as good as the intramuscular. And then we had to develop the label and also test it in consumers. So all of those steps we started on back in probably 2018, once we got some funding. And as we then moved forward, our testing it in the clinic did show that it delivered the drug just as quickly as intramuscular, and even reached 3 times the peak level at its highest. We then went on and did also that label development, tested it in consumers. We tested it down to age 12, so also in adolescents. We tested it in 37% of the subjects were of limited, had limited I'm kind of blanking, literacy. I'm illiterate now. I'm trying to read my stuff. But overall, it was a very successful study. The only criteria that it was a critical task of calling 911. That was the only one where we fell under 90% threshold for getting it, people answering that part right. Because people, when they're in this situation, it's it's a fake situation. There's a dummy lying on the floor. There's a box of naloxone next to them, and you're supposed to follow the instructions. When we debriefed the subjects, 7 of those 11 said they would have called 911 in a real situation, but they just didn't think it made sense in that phony situation. So all in all, we had good testing of our label. We delivered, as far as from the clinic, a drug that will be able to then deliver naloxone appropriately. So as far as the status where we're at, we filed our NDA, which is an application to get approval from the FDA to go directly over the counter with our product. That was filed back in October 2022, so we'll be hearing from the FDA soon. We were also scheduled to have an FDA advisory committee meeting back on next week on March 20th, but the FDA just canceled it about a week ago, telling us that when they met with the advisory committee meeting last month, and some of you may have seen it or heard about it, it was for Narcan to be switched over the counter. So at that point, the FDA, because there was that overwhelming 19-0 positive vote from that committee to get Narcan over the counter, the FDA didn't think there was any need for us to also now go before that committee and make the same arguments. So our committee meeting has been canceled, which is good, but we were excited to get out there and tell our story. So I'm glad I had the opportunity to do that today. And I'd like to think that even if nothing else, what our movement has done, we forced the other companies to go over the counter. If we get approved, it forces all the other companies with drugs that have the same level of naloxone in them to go over the counter. Because once one's approved, they all have to move. So hopefully we had some impact. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Welcome.
Now Dr. Chris Evans from UCLA is going to tell us about fentanyl pills and the use of xylazine or tranq as an adulterant.
Okay.
Chris?
Yeah, well, you've heard about it already, right? Nancy and her great kids have been doing what I think is very important, trying to educate the kids about these fake pills. These pills look almost identical to the pharmaceutical pills, so it's really difficult for them to know what they're getting. You know, they have these pill parties where they just pick pills out of a bowl and take them, and if they have fentanyl in, that's really tragic. So I'm a basic scientist. I'm a clinical preclinical scientist. In 92, we identified the opiate receptor, the gene encoding the opiate receptor. So I'm really very different from what I am now, which is, I do a lot of teaching now, and I teach undergraduates about drugs, and then I take them to the schools to try and give school kids an idea about the risks. And that's what I do a lot. So I'm doing a lot what you do. But they aren't going to listen to an old guy like me, but they will listen to undergraduates about the risks. So that's what I do a lot. So these pills are really, I mean, they have become a big problem, but there's another problem coming, which is really evident in Philadelphia and in the East Coast. And this is this tranq, which is an adulterant used with fentanyl. And it doesn't sort of give the euphoric properties like opioids. It's working on a different system. It's working actually on the adrenergic system. And it's an adrenergic agonist, which actually inhibits the release of noradrenaline in the brain. So it really is a sedative, a very powerful sedative, and used in veterinary medicine, and it's being put in pills with fentanyl. And the problem is it has a withdrawal syndrome, which is very much, well, one of the problems is it has a withdrawal syndrome, which is a little different from, opioids. It gives a lot of anxiety, but so does withdrawal from opioids, and therefore people realize that they want to take it again, and they become addicted to the tranq. So there's addicts out there now with tranq. Now this is sort of coming across America, so it's gradually seeping across states, and I think it's going to be a big problem because it's not reversible by naloxone. So no, Narcan won't work on it. And it's additive with opioids. So when you get tranq with an opioid with fentanyl, it's additive. So the respiratory depression gets worse and people overdose. So yeah, I consider it more, it's sort of like the problem is it's sort of like whack-a-mole. You knock down one part of an addiction problem and another one pops its head up. And, the prescriptions have gone down, which is good in some ways, although some physicians feel they can't adequately treat pain, which is a problem. And other things are, their heads are coming up, these fake pills, tranq coming into different drugs, which really makes a problem in the future. So I think we have to have our focus, I think, needs to be on the drive to take these drugs and the really understanding the reward system deficits which make these drugs really wanted by the people who take them. So I think that's where we've got to aim at, but in the long run.
Thanks, Chris. We're going to head to a new topic now. One where can cure addiction now plays a very important role, and that's new therapies. We desperately need new therapies for substance use disorders. I spent a lot of my career in the private sector and in government, both big pharma and small pharma or biotech. And there's a huge gap. And philanthropy can play a very, very important role here. And I know that's one of the dreams of Nancy is to get new medications. And it'll be medications, plural. It won't be, there's never going to be a silver bullet. We'll take this medicine and you'll never want to take a drug again. It'll be hopefully something like in the future, like heart disease. We have multiple types of medications. You can treat the blood pressure, you can treat the angina, there's lots of different medications. And ultimately, I think that will be the answer when we have a whole cornucopia of new treatments. And one of the important aspects of CAN is we are funding new treatments that some of the riskier things that are hard to get funded either in the government or in the private sector. And there's a very, very important role for philanthropy here. So I'm happy to introduce some speakers now. We're going to talk about potential new medications. And our first speaker will be Dr. Deborah Mash, and she's going to talk about ibogaine as a therapy for substance use disorder. Deborah?
Thank you, Kurt. Greetings from Miami. I'm sorry I'm not with you in LA today, but I'm glad that I have this opportunity to talk to you about ibogaine, which is a transformative psychedelic therapy being developed by Atai Life Sciences and Demorex for opioid use disorder. We recently conducted a dynamic target product profile assessment, speaking with addiction medicine doctors and addiction psychiatrists. And they told us there are in their mind, two major unmet needs for opioids. And that's to develop a treatment that provides higher success rates in achieving abstinence, and also to have a treatment that is more successful in preventing relapse to opioid dependence following opioid detoxification. And that's why we're working very hard to advance ibogaine. Ibogaine is a powerful psychoactive substance that not only alters perception, mood, and feelings, but it also stops addictive behaviors. And in open label studies, peer-reviewed publications, there's been demonstration that the drug can diminish drug craving. It will block opioid withdrawal symptoms very rapidly. And for some, it also seems to prevent relapse. We don't completely understand the mechanism of action, but we can see that it brings about a very rapid reset, most likely by targeting the addiction circuitry in the brain. And in doing so, this helps break the cycle of drug dependence. If you Google ibogaine and go online, you will see online forums that endorse the benefits of ibogaine as an addiction interrupter. And present day estimates are that about 10,000 people have taken ibogaine in what is otherwise areas where the drug is, countries where the drug is unregulated, and this is in the gray zone of addiction treatment. We're working at Demorex with Atai to move ibogaine out of the gray zone, and ibogaine has been granted regulatory approval for human testing in a phase 1/2A clinical trial, joining the current landscape of psychedelic medicines currently in clinical development, like psilocybin, MDMA, among others. We are working towards completing the third and last cohort of volunteers at the intend to treat dose in our phase 1 arm. And the next step will be for us to file and gain regulatory approval for a phase 2 proof of concept trial for opioid relapse prevention. We're also working with Firefly to develop a virtual reality device to prepare patients for ibogaine therapy. Patients will enter the iboga sanctuary where they'll prepare for treatment, learn about how the drug works and what to expect during the drug experience, and then afterwards to use the tools in the VR setting to help them integrate their personal journey. Thank you for listening to us today. If you want to learn more about ibogaine, please visit our website at demorex.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Catherine Cunningham, who's going to tell us a little bit about personalizing substance use disorder treatment.
I think you need to press. Yeah.
Push the green. Thank you, Kurt and Nancy. I really appreciate being here. I have a special reason to have started this trajectory to study substance use disorders and to develop new medications. My father was alcoholic. His father and his grandfather were alcoholic. So disruptive families the entire time. My mother was a golden woman who managed to give us the support we needed, and none of us were caught in that trap. However, that never left me. I'm currently a professor of pharmacology, psychiatry, and neuroscience at the John Seeley School of Medicine in Galveston, Texas. I'm also the Center for Addiction Research there. It has been a big haul to actually become a meaningful group of people focused on addiction, biology, and medications, because it's so difficult to help people appreciate that this is a disease, as we've heard, and it is treatable. And we know we can maximize treatments. The reality is that everybody here sitting at this table and everybody that works in this arena knows how important the problem is, but also knows how difficult it is to achieve. We have been invested in studying mechanisms of action, particularly of cocaine, most recently even ramping that up because of the challenges with cocaine. We have a methamphetamine project beginning as well. And trying to identify medications for treatment of these psychostimulant disorders requires us to think about the individual differences in characteristics that are expressed by users of these drugs. Who becomes a user? Who becomes addicted to the drug? What are the characteristics that are latent and also existing during the substance use? How do we attack those problems and mitigate them so that we can actually produce effective clinical trials that demonstrate the utility of novel medications? One of the challenges in this arena is that when we put we have over 30 patents, we have several repurposing compounds that we're working in clinical trials, for phase 1 clinical trials, hope to get them to phase 2 someday. However, the challenge is that there's so many. Where do I start? The screening in patients to a study is done, a clinical trial is done with positive urine for that drug, for cocaine, and DSMB, that's the diagnostic manual that tells us whether someone actually has a cocaine use disorder. Those are primarily the characteristics we use to get to power a clinical phase 1 trial. We recently ran a phase 1 trial based upon a large amount of preclinical data which all pointed to the fact that lorcaserin, which was it's no longer available, but it was an anti-obesity drug. It suppressed intake in all of the animal models up into primates, and it looked really promising from all possible angles that you looked at it. We started this phase 1 clinical trial. It's a small group of people. It's actually in a clinical research center. They're kept there. They're positive for cocaine when they come in, and they're not treatment seeking. It's very important in that kind of study that you be sure that an individual is not actually seeking treatment. Now, this sounds odd, doesn't it? And this is one of the issues that we have to deal with. So in the phase 1 clinical trial, we demonstrated that lorcaserin suppressed craving for cocaine effectively and statistically significantly. This work was done with Jerry Moeller and his team at VCU. And we got a signal, but the endpoint for the FDA was not reduce craving. It is stop cocaine intake. We gave them the opportunity to take cocaine, and they took it anyway. But they're non-treatment seeking. We were looking at safety as the endpoint. It was safe. There were no serious adverse events or even none of them were serious. So that was a mixed bag. One of the outcomes, the fact that we could reduce craving, would be possibly a positive outcome. So acamprosate is available for alcohol use disorder patients to reduce craving and therefore reduce the amount of drug alcohol is taken, but it doesn't necessarily eliminate alcohol intake. So an abstinence drug that completely blocks all cocaine intake is very hard. Methamphetamine intake is very hard to come by. Lorcaserin entered into a phase 2 clinical trial. This was done by NIDA at multi-sites across the U.S. And lorcaserin, these are outpatients, so they are treatment-seeking CUD. So they want treatment, they want to stop, and they're outpatient studies supplemented with behavioral support, cognitive behavioral support during their outpatient studies. Occasionally they come in and they get urinalysis tests. And so at the end of the trial, about half of those individuals were still positive for cocaine. Many of them did not even have evidence that they had been taking lorcaserin during the outpatient trial. Now, it hasn't been published yet, so not all the data are actually, what's available is on clinicaltrials.gov, but it's considered a failed trial, and therefore another medication for cocaine use disorder is set aside. We need to think more clearly about what we're trying to accomplish in a clinical trial for substance use disorder. No single person, only about no more than 15% of people that take drugs actually get diagnosed with a substance use disorder. But in those that do, there are so many comorbidities that go along with that it's not just single cocaine use in this example. So colleagues of mine at the National Institute of Drug Abuse, Tanya Ramey and Jerry Moeller and a whole team of other people have been working on better ways to do clinical trials. They've come up with a method called phenotyping and FAB, phenotyping assessment of behavior. So the idea is that we gain a lot more information about who that person is. What attributes do we see in those in the cognitive, reward, negative urgency domains, which are all part of what is happening in a sustained substance use disorder person. And by characterizing a more concise and appropriate group of behaviors, then we can look at whether or not we can reduce or change or alter not only drug intake, but reduce the behavioral impacts of the drug. So these are very new projects here, and there's a long way to go on this. But the hope is that when we use a more distinct ability to register what an individual is dealing with from the psychosocial perspective, that we will be able to target medications and behavioral support directly to them, providing personalized medicine for them. That also includes, we haven't mentioned this yet, but there are very strong genetic markers. My dad's grandfather, luckily his son didn't have the challenge, but there's a lot of genetic markers and a lot of environmental markers that go along with this. So as we combine all this knowledge into clinical trials for medications and therapeutic approach, we're going to make a difference. It just seems, as all of us sitting here who are scientists know, it seems slow, but I really feel that these transformational possibilities we're making differences now, and we will be able to cure addiction. We will hit that mark. It's some of the best minds in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. I'd like to remind the audience here and people online to submit questions. After we get done with some of the presentations, we'll have a lightning round. Can someone go around and collect them, or that'd be great?
Isabella will grab some.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, and keep them coming. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. John Crystal, who was a pioneer in the development and use of ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. And now he's going to give us an overview on the use of ketamine potentially for treatments for substance use disorders. John?
Sure. Hi, Kurt. Nancy, I'm sorry I'm not there with you today. It's been wonderful to hear the presentation so far. As an academic, I'm used to always talking with slides, and I hate to read scripts. So I thought that I would do my presentation as an interview. I thought I would interview an expert on ketamine, and that's me. So I'm going to ask myself a series of questions and try to answer them. First, what is ketamine? Ketamine is an anesthetic medication that's been around since the 1960s. It's a derivative of another drug that's been used, has a kind of scary reputation, which is a drug called phencyclidine or angel dust. And just like phencyclidine or PCP, ketamine is was not only developed with a medical purpose, but it also is an abused substance. And so the risk of abuse is something that has to be kept in mind when ketamine is prescribed and taken. So why are people excited about ketamine? And as Kurt mentioned, some of this excitement goes back to the mid-1990s when my colleagues and I tested the effects of ketamine in depressed patients. And what we found was completely shocking to us, which was that some people who had, even some patients who had not responded to other treatments, although the study wasn't designed in that way, some people who got ketamine felt better, started to feel better within a few hours. And by the next morning, some of these folks felt like their depression had completely gone away. And subsequent work with ketamine showed that it was very effective in patients with very treatment-resistant symptoms of depression and anxiety, and that the beneficial effects could be sustained by repeating the dose over time. A version of ketamine called S-ketamine, which is, you might say, one of the two mirror image molecules that make up ketamine, was developed by Janssen in 2019. It was approved by the FDA for treatment-resistant depression. And it has also subsequently been approved by the FDA for depression in the context of significant suicide risk. So the most refractory, the most at-risk people with depression seem like they're a group that particularly benefits by ketamine treatment. So why are we talking about ketamine today? Well, it's because ketamine may play a variety of different kinds of roles in addiction treatment. First, many people use substances to self-medicate untreated anxiety and depression. And so some of the folks that are using these substances are taking other antidepressant medications, but they're just not getting better. And so if we can really move people who are not responding very well to their treatments to more effective treatments that actually control their depression and anxiety, like ketamine and potentially some other treatments that are emerging, we may reduce the need for people to use substances and help them. A second property of ketamine that makes it very useful for some people who are prone to addiction is that it's a very effective way of treating opiate-resistant forms of pain. Some of these forms of pain are called neuropathic pain. And so people who have severe chronic neuropathic pain sometimes take high doses of opiates for long periods of time when they don't even work very well to control the pain, and they become psychologically and physically dependent on the opiates and desperate for better ways to control their pain, which leads some of them to find illegal sources for their opiates. So ketamine can be used as a way to reduce the need for opiates during pain. And when used during certain surgical procedures, can even prevent the subsequent development of neuropathic pain. Another way that that ketamine might be used and related drugs is to reduce the development of physical dependence on opiates. It turns out that if you take a drug like ketamine when you are taking an opiate, that the physical processes associated with the development of physical dependence are attenuated, and you develop less physical dependence, therefore less likelihood to develop symptoms of withdrawal when you stop opiates. And in addition, in work that goes, I would say groundbreaking work that Dr. Rasmussen and I did when we were both young pups working in the laboratory of George Agajanian, a pioneer of neuroscience. We showed that these drugs can reduce the withdrawal syndromes of opiate drugs, and can be used for that purpose, opiates and potentially other drugs of abuse as well. A central and unresolved question at this point is, can we use ketamine to prevent relapse to substance use in people who have detoxified already? Or if they relapse, can we use ketamine to reduce the magnitude of this relapse? And this is really an unresolved question. There are some pilot data that suggest that maybe it might reduce craving or relapse in cocaine use, in opiate use, in alcohol use. And but I have to say that we have studied both ketamine and memantine, which is a related drug, in people recovering from alcohol use disorder. And so far in our hands, when used just by itself, we have not seen strong evidence, certainly not clear evidence, that it can be an effective treatment on its own. We did see some evidence that memantine could enhance the effectiveness of naltrexone, which is an opiate receptor blocker, in treating and reducing alcohol self-administration. But we haven't seen big effects of these drugs on their own. But there's a fascinating new area in ketamine research that may suggest that it could still play a role in reducing or preventing relapse. And that is if it's combined with psychotherapy. And part of this has to do with the way that ketamine manipulates learning and memory. And the idea is that comes out of the work that began in London, the work of Ravi Das in a group at the University College in London, is that if you activate drug memories while people have ketamine in their system, then those drug memories get weakened, and the ability of drug-associated cues to cause craving and relapse might be reduced. And there are a couple of studies that suggest that this might be the case. It's very early days, and it's not at all clear that this is a sufficiently robust effect to be implementable as a treatment. Another line of research says that in the days following a dose of ketamine, that there is enhanced ability to learn, enhanced plasticity. And so that people are exploring the combination of ketamine treatment followed by cognitive and behavioral therapies for addiction. And there's a group in Manchester led by Celia Morgan that is continuing to explore this possibility. So that's the scoop on ketamine, some interesting potential uses, and we hope someday that there will be a way that it can help all the people who need addiction treatment. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Courtney Miller, who is working on a single-use medication for improving substance use disorders and who has received support from CAN for some of her work. Courtney?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Greetings from about an hour and a half north of Deborah in Jupiter, Florida. I'm a California native, so I was sad to not be coming home on this trip, but I'm looking forward to the next CAN event. I will be there. So when I started my research program at UF Scripps, I was really interested in what John was actually just describing, which is the power of drug cues to drive relapse. So we're really interested in trying to prevent relapse to help individuals once they initiate abstinence. And of course, it's those triggers that people talk about that can really induce a strong craving and they can kind of catch you off guard. And so we're interested in removing that motivation. And so in our research, we found that there's a particular protein that's actually also a different kind of it is present in your muscles, but in the brain, it helps to drive learning that occurs. And we found that if we give an inhibitor of that protein just once, it makes in our preclinical models, the motivation for methamphetamine go away. And it seems to be a permanent effect as far out as we're able to test. The preclinical studies show no sign from methamphetamine, and it's highly specific for methamphetamine, and it seems to be only altering one part of the brain, which controls your emotions and motivation, the amygdala. And so thanks to support from NIH, we were able to start a medications development program. And then that translated into co-founding a company, Myosin Therapeutics, with two of my colleagues who were at Merck previously. And so we're developing MT110. As I said, we found that it only has to be administered once, and we've completed the majority of studies that are required to file an investigational new drug application with FDA. We've had a meeting with them, and so that's moving forward. We plan on filing the IND later this year. But what we've found are some additional things, and with the support of CAN, we've realized that we can actually extend the application beyond methamphetamine to other stimulants like cocaine, and also potentially opioids and alcohol. That work is ongoing. We've also found that there may be potential in polysubstance use, so touching on what Kelly was discussing earlier. So there are some potentially transformative effects because we're talking about single administration, but also while it's highly selective for methamphetamine, if we are administering other drugs in the context of methamphetamine as well, it seems to extend to that. So even nicotine. Let's see what else to tell you. I think that probably covers it for now. We're excited to move it forward. It's a long and slow process because this is something that would be first in class. So FDA is appropriately cautious. They're also extremely understaffed. So that means that everything is moving slowly. And I'm sure there are other people on the panel that can attest to that. But I'm happy to answer questions once we're finished. Thanks.
Thanks, Courtney. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Garrett Stuber at the University of Washington, and he's going to talk about screening for new medications. How can we find new medications? How do we start finding new medications? Garrett?
Hi, folks. Greetings from Seattle. My name is Garrett Stuber, and I'm a neuroscientist and professor at the University of Washington. Today, I'd like to expand a little bit on what we've already heard about the complex nature of addiction and the need for preclinical research that considers the multifaceted aspects of this disorder. Addiction shouldn't really be considered as a singular condition. Emotional disorders, chronic pain, and addiction are often comorbid, and all current treatments are insufficient. Only 10% of the estimated 23 million Americans in need of treatment for substance use disorder are receiving any treatment at all. Behavioral therapy, 12-step programs, and harm reduction strategies like methadone are not well suited for everyone, and the continued use of traditional prescription opioids for this is far from ideal. My job is to refine animal models for addiction research and to leverage biotechnology, machine learning, and AI tools to better understand the cellular and molecular diversity of the brain and how our brains are altered by chronic drug exposure. Animal models for addiction have a lot of face validity. Rodents and other mammals will readily self-administer addictive drugs like cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl, just like humans do. Researchers such as myself have also used these animal models to also show that environmental cues and stimuli associated with drugs also drive relapse as they do in humans. These studies give us a good start to understand the neurobiology of addiction, but animals, like people, vary in their propensity to self-administer drugs. Furthermore, we have not paid sufficient attention to other dimensions related to addiction, such as chronic pain, emotional distress, and trauma. I advocate for expanding our thinking on the neurobiology of addiction by developing new data-driven ways to quantify these related behaviors, enabling us to better comprehend the relationship between addiction, pain, and emotion. Neuroscience, like other scientific fields, have entered the era of big data and AI. We can now generate incredible data sets on brain cell types, as well as potential therapeutic targets to normalize maladaptive molecular changes caused by chronic drug exposure. We can also utilize these significant data sets from animal models to discover new brain circuits, cells, and drug targets to effectively reverse engineer the addicted brain. Developing new therapeutic treatments for addiction requires foundational basic science research in neuroscience. By unraveling how the neurobiology, genetics, and behavior of animals relates to the complex nature of addiction in humans, we can advance better medications, therapies, and outcomes for those who struggle with substance use. Our work aims to provide not only new therapeutic targets for addiction, but to also fundamentally understand the neurobiology of addiction, pain, and emotion. Thanks.
Thanks, Garrett. We'd like to now have Dr. Stephanie Caligiuri from the Icahn School of Medicine telling us about how to uncover some new therapeutics and point to some new directions in developing medications. Stephanie?
Before I jump into the science, I'd love to highlight for everyone here today how I feel how this community that you've created, Nancy, is very special and very unique. You've taken something that is incredibly painful and turned it into something that can be hopeful with positive momentum. And that combination of the sincerity that you have with great science, I mean, that's the type of combination that makes waves. It's the type of combination that can induce change. So thank you for letting us all be a part of that. So the way that I like to describe our science is with a bit of an analogy. So let's say we're all born with a storybook. Let's say it's a storybook we all know, like the story of Cinderella. And we're going through that storybook. And let's say we turn to page 27, because 27 is my favorite number. And I realize, my page 27 is a little bit different from Kelly, your page 27, and Judy, your page 27, and Isabella from your page 27. I wonder why that is. And so my job is to understand, is that page 27 just descriptive? Is it just describing the way the castle looks in the scene and really isn't important to the outcome of the story? Or is page 27 pivotal? Is that the point in the story where Cinderella loses her glass slipper? And if that page 27 is different, how significant that can change the outcome of the story. So that's an analogy to how all of us are born with a written book inside of us, and that's our genetic code. And all of us have very slight differences in our genetic code. And as a scientist, it's my job to understand, is that slight difference just descriptive? Is it not going to change your story, your outcome? Or is it pivotal? Is it going to change your story? Is it going to change your risk for developing drug addiction if you are ever exposed to a drug? And so what is on page 27? I believe it's the genetic code for our bitter taste receptors. You might be wondering, bitter taste receptors, what does that have to do with drug addiction? And so it was only about 8 years ago that we realized the bitter taste receptors are not just expressed on our tongue, but they're expressed in our lungs, our pancreas, and potentially even in our brain. And that raises the question, what on earth are they doing there? Because obviously the bitter taste receptors in the brain are not coming into direct contact with food. And so what I've hypothesized is that the bitter taste receptors are more so like the bodyguards that are constantly sensing what is in our circulation to say, hey, this could be harmful. You should stop consuming this. And so what we're saying is that certain people might be born with a slight difference in their genetic code for the bitter taste receptors, where their bitter taste receptors are not as functional. their bodyguards are not online. And so when they consume a drug for the first time, they may not have that safety signal that's saying, hey, you should stop consuming this. This could be harmful. What's important to realize is that, yes, genetics can play a role in the predisposition to drug addiction, but genetics are not our destiny. Genetics are providing us a target. We can look to the bitter taste receptors now as a target for therapeutics so that we can rewrite our page 27 so we can change the outcome of our story.
Love how you put that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I really.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're collecting a lot of great questions. Please keep them coming. It's going to be a good lightning round. We're now going to go on to our last topic with Dr. Adam Kaplan, and he'd like to talk about mental health and substance use disorder.
Thanks, Kurt. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yep. And thanks, Nancy, for allowing me to be part of this amazing panel and community. So I was going to tell a time traveling joke, but you guys didn't like it. So instead, I decided to go back in time to better understand what mental illnesses like addiction and depression have in common. Both diseases and the people who have them are stigmatized, which can have lethal consequences. Stigma has three components: stereotyping, prejudice, which combine to cause discrimination. What do I mean by discrimination? Let's start with the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Originally, the founders were in fact referring only to all white men. And they discriminated against anyone who was not like them. To the founding fathers, everyone else was not one of us, but rather one of them. As we've evolved as a country, we have struggled to extend these unalienable rights to also encompass a wider assemblage of us, including all people of sex, regardless of sex and race, all people regardless of disability and disease, with addiction and depression among the most stigmatized diseases. Money is one way of quantitating progress towards equality. Women earn 82 cents for every man's dollar. Blacks earn 70 cents for every dollar whites earn. Addiction and depression annually receive 23 and 32 cents respectively from NIH for research for every dollar spent on cancer. People suffering from addiction and depression remain alienated from all three of the rights guaranteed to them in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So first, life. Death from drug overdoses is the fourth leading cause across the entire lifespan of years of life lost in the United States. And Nancy has already quoted us below the age of 50, the importance. Depression, suicide, which is the lethal consequence of severe depression, is the second leading cause of death in the United States from the ages of 10 to 34. Second, liberty. The word addiction derives from the Latin word addictus, a person who had become bound as a slave to his creditor, and evolved to describe those who have become metaphorically slaves to their addiction. As a result of the hijacking of the brain's reward system, as Jason had pointed out, a hallmark of all addictions is called the narrowing of the repertoire, which is the process whereby progressively more of an individual's thoughts, feelings, and behavior become focused on engaging in the addiction until it becomes his or her only salient reward. In depression, it is a disease characterized by the lack of the ability of the brain to be rewarded. In this context, the person experiences psychic pain without pleasure, punishment without reward, and has a narrowing of this ability to even envision being able to be happy again in the future, which leads to the hopelessness. Third, happiness. Those people who have opiate use disorders, 74% of them will experience a depression at some point in their life. Depression, by definition, is a state of unresponsive and unrelenting sadness. And these two work against each other. Opiate use causes depression, depression worsens opiate use. So in conclusion, the exclusion of those suffering from addiction and depression from our collective willingness to fight, to preserve, and restore their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is the result of stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination, no less egregious than discriminating against someone based on the color of their skin or their sex or gender. Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. If there is one thing COVID should have taught all of us, it's that our lives are inextricably linked together, and we will rise or fall depending on how we treat one another. So my hope is that if I could time travel into the future, I would find that we look on people regardless of their sex, race, or afflictions, including addiction and depression, as us instead of them. That we will finally realize we are all that we all mutually share the same garment of destiny. And I know what the color will be. The color of the garment will be purple. Yes. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Great.
Thank you, Does it work?
Yeah, no.
Thank you, everybody. It's so interesting to hear all these amazing studies and things that are going on and how everybody's looking at it. A lot of you sent up questions. We're going to answer the questions in a quick way and give you some quick answers. And then we're going to do a quick afterwards showing how you use Narcan with Jason and Isabella. And when you leave, we're going to give out Narcan, which is something you should all keep on you and cherish it. It's really important to have it. It's like the EpiPen you didn't know you needed, because you might just need it one day, and you should have it and know how to use it. So, oh, she's saying something.
No, you can get Narcan at the registration outside, where you can, there will be a table.
All right, great. Let's start some of the questions.
Lightning round.
Lightning round. This first one I'm going to ask Kelly to tackle first, and then anybody else jump in. What are some of the most powerful substances that can reduce cravings from drugs?
That's a hard question. There's not many substances that in the context of medications that effectively reduce craving across all individuals. However, we recently completed a study in persons who have opioid use disorder, and we looked at a medication called Balsamra, which is suvorexant. It's a insomnia medication, and these were individuals who we tapered off of opioids. And we found that despite the fact that they were on opioids, that they were tapering off, they still had significant amounts of craving. When we administered that medication in a double-blind manner on top of the opioids that they were receiving, we saw what I find to be the biggest reduction in craving that I've seen across all of the studies that I've worked on. So that, to me, there's a lot of reasons why that might be the case, but we think that medication and that class of medications, which is a relatively new class of medications, has a lot of promise, at least with persons who have opioid use disorder. And I know that there's many groups that are investigating it for other forms of substance use as well.
Thank you, Kelly. I would just like to underline that some of Kelly's work done on suvorexant and the orexin antagonists, and there are now 3 on the market now, show great potential for its utility in not only treating sleep, but other aspects of substance use disorder. That would be off-label use. It's not approved for that, but they are on the market. And I think it's not getting enough attention. And we're supporting additional work from Kelly to pursue that work further. So if you're interested in it, ask your doctor. Great. There's a question here. In your opinion, what are some of the keys to success for sobriety and the most effective methods for getting sober? Jason, I'm going to let you tackle that first.
That's a multifaceted question as well. I mean, for me, I'll share what worked for myself. And that was once I actively arrested the disease and I got stabilized, I was at a place where I was able to focus on myself. I had to get open. I had to get honest. But once I was able to do that and start focusing on what I wanted in life, I was able to instill a purpose and passion. And I always state, like, it's something how I maintain my sobriety, and this is from a very high level, but consistency creates structure, and structure creates safety. And so on a daily basis, I have to work on my program, and I have a routine that I don't deviate from.
Great, thanks, Jason. A couple questions here related to xylazine. I'm going to start out with Chris, if you want to tackle these, and anybody else jump in if you want to add some more. Is tranq or xylazine rewarding itself, or does it just potentiate the action of fentanyl? And what causes xylazine addiction?
So my understanding is that tranq can become addictive in itself because there's a withdrawal syndrome. And that withdrawal syndrome is high anxiety. So, you know, with most drugs, the withdrawal is always opposite from the drug state. And that's the problem, right? Because if a drug's making you feel euphoric, when you're going off the drug, you feel dysphoric. If you have anxiety and you have a sedative, when you go off the drug, you have more anxiety. So you crave that sedative again. So almost any drug like that, which is having an effect, which you're treating a psychological state, when you stop it, you're going to crave it because you want to stop the withdrawal symptoms, right? So I think that's how that could work. But I'm not a clinician, and I think if I talk to people who actually deal with patients who they've seen have tranq, then maybe Justin.
Yeah.
What could be about that? Are people actively buying xylazine, or it's accidentally
Yes,
put in?
they are.
They
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and that's one of the challenges is in thinking about a drug supply, there's a subset of folks that know they're having xylazine, know there's xylazine in it, but there's a significant subset of folks, if not the majority of folks, that don't know that drug is in there.
Know that if they use Narcan for that, that's not going to do anything to help them.
Some do and some don't, and that's one of the challenges
Yep.
too. So when you have an overdose and someone is unresponsive to Narcan, it's unclear, was it because there's something else on board? Is it that the Narcan wasn't delivered soon enough? Is it that I need to deliver another dose? And so kind of in the broader landscape, it's the consistent challenge of Chris brought up the whack-a-mole of when you clamp down on one drug, other drugs will appear in a market. And often those other drugs will be more deadly, will be more discreet because they're harder to detect, and will be present new challenges that we don't expect. And xylazine is just one of those examples. Fentanyl was the example until xylazine came along. So yeah, and it speaks to, Chris, I think you brought this up, addressing those more systemic issues and those more broad concerns of what can we do to help someone that's not just decreasing the drug supply. How can we help what they're seeking help for, whether that's from a drug perspective, from a mental health perspective, meet them where they're at.
Can I ask you one more question, Jason? So I sort of learned this week something I didn't know, that a lot of people are actively buying fentanyl, and there are people that are hugely addicted. And I've heard that fentanyl is equivalent of you having 50 to 100 shots of heroin. You have to build up a huge tolerance to be able to do that. Do you see that that's like an impossible thing to detox off of? I know it's hard when you've had fentanyl in your system, but like when you have that level of it, how does one detox?
I'll briefly touch on this, but then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Dr.
Okay.
Dunn, who directly works with this and I think can speak to it well. But at least within a clinical setting, and when we're looking at the withdrawal syndrome and the detoxification process that comes with fentanyl, it just looks different. It's longer. It starts a little later, so you don't see this immediate problem, but it's delayed onset, and then the offset is just so much longer. We've seen that over the last 4 or 5 years in the research that we run and the work I do with some local clinical providers. And even in the past year, that shifted even more with the introduction of xylazine. That withdrawal syndrome looks different, and that compounds the problem. We're seeing these blood pressure effects that we didn't see before. We're seeing other physiological effects, that skin lesions, all these sorts of things that just look different. I'll let Dr. Dunn speak to any more that she might have to say there.
Yeah, I'll just add that for a while, we often talk about and we often hear that fentanyl is more potent than heroin. And we think of that as being the kind of the distinguishing feature that differentiates it from heroin. But in fact, fentanyl is engineered to be very different from other opioids. And what I think we need to recognize now is that it's working in the body in a way that other opioids have not. And the expression of withdrawal that we're seeing in patients is very different from what we saw with heroin. It's more severe and it's nonlinear. It goes up and down. We're having clinically significant levels of high blood pressure and other things that we need to manage, which we haven't had to do before. And I think it speaks to this notion that we're trying to take medications and treatments that have worked for other opioids and assuming that we can transition them over. And I'm starting to believe that we really can't, that we need to have new approaches because it's just not working. And in addition, we don't really see heroin coming back. We talk to our patients and they reminisce about nostalgically about this and the natural opioid days, because now they can only get synthetic product. That's all they can get, whether they want to or not. And I think we need to recognize that our opioids are different and we need new strategies.
Yep. Thanks, Kelly and Jason. Justin, sorry. Here's an open, I don't know who will take this, but whoever wants that. How do you see wearable sensors preventing overdoses and improving outcomes and treatments for substance use disorder? Maybe you want to grab that one? Justin?
I'll jump in again. So we're doing some work with wearable sensors. So I briefly mentioned in passing, we work with a addiction treatment provider that's just north of town in Havre de Grace, Maryland, the residential program and outpatient program. And we've been introducing the use of wearable sensors, so things like wristography, where you're measuring things like heart rate and sleep and cardiovascular tone, things like resting heart rate and heart rate variability. And one of the goals is we know problems like sleep are prevalent, not just in opioid use disorder, particularly in opioid use disorder, but across substance use disorders. And often patients will have these problems very early on. And it's hard to see that transition from I'm having a problem to I'm getting better. And a doctor can say, well, you're looking better. Are you feeling better? And they're like, no, I don't really see it. And so one of the ways that we're approaching that is being able to show patients in real time, hey, look, the first week you were here, you slept 2 hours a night. You're now up to 4 hours a night, or you're now up to 6 hours a night. And it's a steady progress that you're having. And so having that ability to provide feedback. I think that's a little different than one of the questions that that's implicit in there of also having real-time recognition of overdoses. I know there's some good work going on in that regard as well.
If I could just jump in, obviously the work that Justin's doing is right hands-on, but we have yet to fully experience the digital revolution, and that people are now, with this thing on our sort of waist, it can detect so many things, movement and and among them people are starting to develop, using artificial intelligence, ways of saying, hey, by the way, you're heading back where you used to buy your drugs, whether or not you know that, it's not just a coincidence and you need to sort of come back. So the use of technology is an exciting area that I think will help a lot.
Can I just add one more comment? That the study that Justin described is a study that's been funded by CAN.
We told you, but the good money's put to good use. Here's a question specifically for Dr. Caligiuri. Are there compounds that interact with bitter taste receptors that can influence addiction?
I love that question. Thank you to whoever asked it. And that's exactly what we are trying to understand. So we know that a lot of the addictive drugs happen to be what we classify as bitter alkaloids. And they share the same chemical structure. So you name it: morphine, heroin, fentanyl, oxycodone, methamphetamine, cocaine, even nicotine and caffeine. They are all bitter alkaloids that we know interact with the bitter taste receptor. So speaking to the limitation that Kelly had pointed out earlier, our system is designed to help individuals that are battling with one drug at a time, whereas this system perhaps could tackle all drugs at once. Are there compounds that interact with the bitter taste receptors? Yes. For example, we know that there are antagonists or blockers that can block the activity of bitter taste receptors. I test them in preclinical models, for example, and know that yes, it can interfere and influence the propensity for addiction at the preclinical level. We also know that there are agonists that can activate the bitter taste receptors too. But what some of our research is showing is that we may not even necessarily have to target the bitter taste receptors themselves, but the downstream products, which might be even easier to target. So yes, there are ways to manipulate that system in a positive way to hopefully influence drug addiction and relapse.
Thanks, Stephanie. Here's a question for Judy. Will Narcan work on an individual experiencing a fentanyl overdose?
Yes, it's being used now. Fentanyl has been in the drug supply for quite a few years now, where I think the vast majority of overdoses in the past few years have had fentanyl involved. And even in those cases, there was a publication, blanking on the author about 3 years ago, looking at what percent of overdoses with in an area that was where fentanyl was highly prevalent. And they saw that 76 to 84% of overdoses were reversed with even a single naloxone administration. And in that particular study, it was 51% of those doses were 2 milligrams. So yes, don't give up on naloxone. It should still be used. And yes, please go ahead.
No, so I just wanted, to underscore what Judy's saying. The New York Times yesterday actually reported on a article that came out in Pediatrics 3 days ago that told us that from the ages of 0 to 5, 50% of all of the lethal overdoses in children is due to opiates because they're sitting around. So there are many reasons to want to have naloxone around, including for our children. So
yeah.
And I'll just touch on one more quick thing, which I think speaks to the importance of what is being done today with the distribution. I was on a call recently where they were talking about we should have Narcan next in AED. We should have Narcan in public places, just have it immediately available. And why that's the case is it's not just about getting it there, it's about getting it there on time. Fentanyl shortens that window a little bit. It's partly because of the potency, partly for other reasons, but that immediacy of having it on hand, having it immediately available, delivering it immediately is what's super important.
Is it true that 70% of the opiate overdoses are because of fentanyl?
Actually, I read a statistic the other day that it's even higher than that.
Oh,
And it's changing in a semi-annual basis now. That's why it's climbed so much.
okay. And everybody's going to get this when they leave, Narcan, which is great, but it's something you should keep on you at all times.
And one thing I would like to add in, we talked a lot today about polysubstance abuse. So someone might have another sedative on board that causes them to remain sedated. It doesn't mean that naloxone isn't working if the person is still sedated. Right. It might be restoring their breathing, which is what's going to keep them alive. They can be sleeping, but they're breathing. So it's important to again, if they're still sleepy, it doesn't mean that they're not responding. To pay attention to their breathing.